to another edition of the Flood House. Today I'm starting to put in insulation. But what we're doing first is we're covering the wall cavities with radiant barrier. So I tore down all of the exterior sheathing that was contaminated by the floodwater. And first I'll put in the radiant barrier as you see here. This stuff is reflective, the radiant barrier, and it's very tough stuff. It's I think the company's called Attic Foil, but you can see it's tough stuff. When you staple it in, it stays there. You got to really rip it off the staples. So it's made to be flexible and bent. I cut it for each wall cavity. So I've got some pre-cut stuff over here. That's what I do. I'll cut 8 or 10 of them, and then I'll come over here and install it. So all I do is kind of form it in the wall cavity like this and get it as near the top as I can. Something like that. Staple it up. Get it right up against the top plate as far as I can. And staple it in. Now I'll put a couple more staples here. And I'll kind of form it to the wall cavity as I move down. Now, I've got no electrical wires in this wall cavity, no boxes, no nada. So I thought it would be a good place to demonstrate the installation of it. So I just kind of move down. What I do is when I'm in production mode, I'll stay on the ladder and put up 3 or 4 of them. Get down from the ladder and go ahead and staple down where it's kind of uncomfortable to reach anymore. In other words, it's too low. And then I get on my rear end and scoot around, and I'll staple the bottom part of the 3 or 4 rows. But this time I'll just do one. Now, come down here to the bottom. Finish stapling this one in. And I'll show you what I do when I get to the bottom of this thing. Put a staple here. Put a staple there. And now what I do, just to make it tidy, I don't think you really have to do this, but then I'll cut a notch in it, make the installation a little prettier. I'll cut that, and I'll stuff the radiant barrier down in the cavity between the sill plate and the outside brick. So the theory behind this stuff is it's a radiant barrier. So if you're right up against the surface like this piece of wood, it's still going to inhibit the heat transfer from the wood to the interior part of the house, as I understand it, as I read it. But the theory is, if you've got enough of an air gap between two surfaces and you have the radiant barrier is going to reflect the heat that comes off these bricks, for instance, in this case, the bricks. So I've got enough of an air gap here. If I nail it, staple into the sides of these studs, the radiant barrier is going to be offset from the brick maybe an inch, something like that, maybe less with the cement, but average about an inch. So my theory is it's sufficient as a gap to prevent the heat, or put it this way, make the radiant barrier effective in reflecting the heat. So this house has one air conditioner for 3,000 square feet or 3,100 square feet, so it's going to need all the help it can get. What we'll do, what we've done, is we put the radiant barrier on. See, I'm probably about halfway around the house now, maybe a little less, but I got a ways to go on it. And then we come back and put the water barrier, not vapor barrier, but water barrier on top of the radiant barrier. See, here's the radiant barrier. Here's the house wrap, and then I'll put the insulation in the cavity like I've got here. And then over this goes the drywall. So it'll be radiant barrier, house wrap, insulation, drywall. So you want to make sure you got all your plans, all your wiring done, security alarm run, all the cabling's done before you close up these walls. Because once you close up these walls, it's going to be a lot more painful making changes. I've got an old telephone line here that I'll probably keep, change the plug out, but I'll probably keep this, even though it's not necessarily used anymore. But anyway, that's the installation instructions that we're going through. And by the way, I got this, told the city what I was going to do, exactly what I was going to do, and that was okayed. So they're going to come back and inspect the final product with the insulation in. But they've already agreed that that's probably the best way to do it. Some of the people in the neighborhood are tearing down the brick from the exterior of the home, putting sheathing back on the outside of the 2x4s, the frame, and then they're re-bricking. So to me, that's a lot of extra expense. I think the best method is what I'm doing here, the most cost-effective. The radiant barrier for the entire first floor of this house, on the exterior walls only, I think ran me about $500. So it's very cost-effective. If it cuts down on the heat transmission, boy, that'd be a good thing. Upstairs, second floor, where I really need it, I can't put a radiant barrier in because the drywall is up, and I don't want to pull all the drywall out just to put the radiant barrier in. So if it's on the bottom floor and the brick gets pretty hot, as you know, if it's effective in keeping the heat out of here, that'll help the air conditioning system quite a bit. So okay, that's it for insulation. I'll see you next time on the Flood House.